All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending tonight's Tough Topics discussion. The Tough Topics series was created to provide a safe space to discuss subjects that you may be afraid to ask about. As librarians, we are here to help and not to judge. This year, Shreve Memorial Library has partnered with the Louisiana Department of Health Office of Public Health Region 7 to bring you a series of discussions on opioid addiction and substance abuse. Tonight, we have Dr. Natasha Seals, Louisiana Opioid Pharmacist Coordinator and Educator for the Louisiana Department of Health, Office of Public Health, Bureau of Community Preparedness. Tonight, her presentation will educate us on exactly what are opioids and what do they do. Before we begin, I'd like to ask everyone to please complete the pre-survey if you have not done so already. The link to the survey is provided in the chat box. Also, I'd like to remind everyone to please keep your screens on mute and submit any questions you may have through the chat feature. At the end of the presentation, we will have a discussion period where you'll be able to interact with Dr. Seals and talk about some of the things that you've learned in tonight's presentation. So without further ado, Natasha, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Samantha. And once again, as stated, I'm Natasha, and we're going to have a conversation this evening about what opioids are and what we can expect when we use them and some differences between those and some other substances. So give me a moment now to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes,
Can you
ma'am.
hear me? All right, thanks a bunch. So as stated, I'm Dr. Natasha Seals and I work for LDH. I have no disclosures to disclose of financial or conflict of interest, and here's a brief review of the references used for this presentation. The objectives for today, we're going to identify common stimulants and common opioids, know the basics of how opioids work, know how opioids affect the US and Louisiana, recognize signs of addiction and overdose, know what resources are available to dispose of unused medication, the benefits of having naloxone, as well as resources and sites to find opioid treatment programs in your area. So to start the presentation off, I would like to just have a little bit of fun. And for each of the next 6 slides, let's take about 30 seconds to see if you already know the answers to these questions and how they affect Louisiana. We're going to give it about 30 seconds. And please, if you wouldn't mind, just slip your answers into the chat box. And Samantha's going to help me monitor the chat box. And also we can use the chat box function during the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to put as many as you would like in there. And towards the end, we'll try to go back and recap, because if you're like me, you have a one-track mind, and sometimes you'll forget about it by the time we get all the way to the end. So the first question is, which drug is not an opioid?
We have one answer. Do you want me? They're all giving in their answers now.
Cool beans. I'll give them a few more seconds. All right. Our next question. How many opioid-involved deaths did Louisiana have in 2019? Next, how many opioids have actions in what portion of the body? What is not a sign of addiction? Which characteristic is not a sign of opioid overdose? And we may find out, Samantha, that they know all the answers already and we can just end early.
I don't know if we can do that, but they are given lots of answers to the question. So I'm interested to see which answers are right.
My last question, select an approved method of disposal for unused medication. Okay. So let's get into our presentation, the nuts and bolts of it. How many of you know the difference between stimulants and opioids? And the first thing we have in this chat box, I need someone to tell me what is in the vial right here with the orange pills and what is in the vial with the white pill. That lets me know how much you know if it's a stimulant or an opioid. Honestly, I don't know what it is either. I was just teasing you for a second. So what is a stimulant? Stimulants are a class of drugs that speed up messages between the brain and the body. Prescription stimulants increase the activity of brain chemicals that are called dopamine and norepinephrine. So for dopamine, it's involved in the reinforcement of rewarding behaviors. Norepinephrine, on the other side, is involved with your blood vessels, blood pressure, your heart rate, blood sugars, as well as your breathing. It also has a factor in the force of muscle contractions that you have, as well as contractions of your heart. Stimulants are used to treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, narcolepsy, as well as obesity. They do that because they increase alertness, attention, and energy. They can cause both dependence as well as tolerance. Stimulants produce an overabundance of dopamine, that chemical I told you about earlier, with continued overconsumption. The brain will stop producing dopamine at its normal levels because essentially it has become conditioned to receive it from an external source. This can cause withdrawal when the person actually stops taking the medication, creating physical dependency and leading to continued use for that person to continue seeking that feeling of normal. With repeated misuse, you can see things like anxiety, panic, seizures, as well as paranoia. And so one looming question that is always persistent is, are stimulants addictive? And so the long and shorter answer is yes, it can be with improper use. So basically, the quicker those dopamine levels shoot up, the greater chance or your risk for abuse. And so that is why it is important whenever you go to a doctor, you go to someone who was well versed in doing those types of medications, because you don't want to expose yourself to an increased risk because of improper usage. A lot of people are concerned for children that have ADHD if they are more susceptible to having later substance abuse. Most studies so far say the answer is no, that whether you take a stimulant or not, if you have ADHD, does not actually increase your chance of abuse later in life. However, the actual condition of ADHD tends to make you more impulsive. And because of that impulsivity, you are more likely to have more risky behaviors. There are some risk factors that are involved with stimulant overusage. Men are greater risk than women to use just about all illicit drugs, unfortunately. However, women have the same amount of risk of actually then developing a substance use disorder. Also, psychiatric disorders as well as alcohol use puts you at an increased risk. Stimulant withdrawal is not typically dangerous or life-threatening. However, the subsequent depression that you will get, especially after using amphetamines, can be very severe. So if you have someone that you know that used it and you're kind of concerned, just make sure you're watching for suicidal behaviors. At this time, there are no approved drugs to treat stimulant dependence. And so mostly for all stimulants, the trend is going up for all factors for all years. So we're going to look at that some more on the next slide. Give me 1 minute to get my little trusty laser here. So right here, we're going to look at stimulant-involved deaths in Louisiana from 2014 to 2019. This column here shows you the number of deaths, and at the bottom, it shows you the years. This chart is representative of all stimulants that are inclusive of cocaine, amphetamines, and methamphetamines that are both illicit or illegal and prescribed prescriptions. And so you'll see that from 2018 to 2019, there was an increase that was equivalent to a 35% increase between those years. Now, overall, from 2014 to 2019, there was still a constant increase. The increase was 218%. Now, some people will abuse, unfortunately, and use stimulants plus opioids, and that death rate is actually also increasing. It is said to be increasing by 20% each year since 2018. Stimulant poisoning deaths make up the second largest type of specified drug death. Now, this is important because, as you know, there is a lot of focus on opioids at this time, which is deservingly so. But that lets you also know that there are other drugs, unfortunately, that we need to watch for signs of overdose and signs of abuse for our populations, be it adults as well as children. Stimulant poisoning deaths increased from 13% of all drug-involved deaths in 2014 to 23% in 2019. Here notice this is common types of stimulants. So we have Adderall or Ritalin, which is amphetamines. We have cocaine, caffeine, Sudafed, which is used to make something called crystal meth. I'm sure you've heard of that. Nicotine, and you have diet aids and herbals such as ephedra, which I think most people are aware of, something called cat, and bitter orange. So cat is a leafy green plant that is native to Ethiopia. It has effects similar to a mild amphetamine. People will actually chew these leaves for the effects because those leaves actually contain two different types of stimulants, and the use is actually illegal in the US. Now, bitter orange, on the other hand, is a tree that's native to Asia, and it contains something called synephrine. The extract from that plant is commonly used in products for weight loss supplements. It is also thought to be helpful for athletic performance as well as indigestion, but the data for that doesn't really scientifically support it, but it is still used. So you'll find in some of the aids that you find over the counter. Methamphetamines, this type of methamphetamine that's a prescription would be Dizocin. And then another one that you will hear of that is a street use is something called Yaba or crazy. So that Yaba means crazy in Thai. And what happens is you'll see these in these rave parties, unfortunately, that our youth attend. And it's taking meth plus caffeine. And it's something that you take orally, and it's a small little bright colored pill, and it's usually flavored like candy. And unfortunately, others will sometimes melt it down, and it's something called chasing the dragon. So if you're an adult and you're on here, you have children, and you hear them say something like that, kind of put your antennas up and know there's something else going on. So this next slide is one of my favorite slides. Every time I see it, I feel it. Ouch, like why does that hurt? Stepping on those tacks, or if you're like me and you have children, you have a little boy, especially, you have Legos all over your house. And when you step on it, oh my gosh, it hurts. And you wonder, how does that pathway work when it hurts? And how do you fix it? As a pharmacist, this is one of the most common questions I get, be it at work when I'm working on the counter, or from people that I know that come to my house just for casual conversation. How does it know where to go? So I found a great little video that gives you about a quick little synopsis on how this works. So give me one moment to turn it on for you.
It sounds like, are you playing the video in the on your screen? Because we're still seeing your PowerPoint screen.
Oh. Now that shouldn't have happened. Hold on one moment. Give me one moment.
No problem.
So let's go back because I'm sharing my screen.
Yes. Maybe if you'll end the PowerPoint real quick or minimize the PowerPoint, it might pull it up.
So they're both minimized, but I can always go back to them and pull them because I really want them to see this video.
Okay, yes.
All right. Could you hear the volume of it?
It sounded like you were playing it in the background.
Okay.
So I tell you what, if you have the video pulled up, if you'll just end your screen share and then restart your screen share for the video, that might work. Because that way your PowerPoint will, yeah, okay. And then restart it.
And then restart it.
With
gotcha.
the video.
And click the video.
And make sure you, okay, yeah, and make sure you click use computer audio for the video.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's see.
Yes, we got it now.
Thank you so much.
Say you're at the beach and you get sand in your eyes. How do you know the sand is there? You obviously can't see it, but if you're a normal, healthy human, you can feel it. That sensation of extreme discomfort, also known as pain. Now, pain makes you do something. In this case, rinse your eyes until the sand is gone. And how do you know the sand is gone? Exactly, because there's no more pain. There are people who don't feel pain. Now, that might sound cool, but it's not. If you can't feel pain, you could get hurt or even hurt yourself and never know it. Pain is your body's early warning system. It protects you from the world around you and from yourself. As we grow, we install pain detectors in most areas of our body. These detectors are specialized nerve cells called nociceptors that stretch from your spinal cord to your skin, your muscles, your joints, your teeth, and some of your internal organs. Just like all nerve cells, they conduct electrical signals, sending information from wherever they're located back to your brain. But unlike other nerve cells, nociceptors only fire if something happens that could cause or is causing damage. So, gently touch the tip of a needle. You'll feel the metal, and those are your regular nerve cells, but you won't feel any pain. Now, the harder you push against the needle, the closer you get to the nociceptor threshold. Push hard enough, and you'll cross that threshold and the nociceptors fire, telling your body to stop doing whatever you're doing. But the pain threshold isn't set in stone. Certain chemicals can tune nociceptors, lowering their threshold for pain. Now, when cells are damaged, they and other nearby cells start producing these tuning chemicals like crazy, lowering the nociceptor's threshold to the point where just touch can cause pain. And this is where over-the-counter painkillers come in. Aspirin and ibuprofen block production of one class of these tuning chemicals, called prostaglandins. Let's take a look at how they do that. When cells are damaged, they release a chemical called arachidonic acid. Now, two enzymes called COX-1 and COX-2 convert this arachidonic acid into prostaglandin H2. which is then converted into a bunch of other chemicals that do a bunch of things, including raise your body temperature, cause inflammation, and lower the pain threshold. Now, all enzymes have an active site. That's the place in the enzyme where the reaction happens. The active sites of COX-1 and COX-2 fit arachidonic acid very cozily. As you can see, there's no room to spare. Now, it's in this active site that aspirin and ibuprofen do their work. So they work differently. Aspirin acts like a spine from a porcupine. It enters the active site and then breaks off, leaving half of itself in there, totally blocking that channel and making it impossible for the arachidonic acid to fit. This permanently deactivates COX-1 and COX-2. Ibuprofen, on the other hand, enters the active site but doesn't break apart or change the enzyme. COX-1 and COX-2 are free to spit it out again, but for the time that ibuprofen is in there, the enzyme can't bind arachidonic acid and can't do its normal chemistry. But how do aspirin and ibuprofen know where the pain is? Well, they don't. Once the drugs are in your bloodstream, they're carried throughout your body, and they go to painful areas just the same as normal ones. So that's how aspirin and ibuprofen work. But there are other dimensions to pain. Neuropathic pain, for example, is pain caused by damage to our nervous system itself. There doesn't need to be any sort of outside stimulus. And scientists are discovering that the brain controls how we respond to pain signals. For example, how much pain you feel can depend on whether you're paying attention to the pain or even your mood. So pain is an area of active research. If we can understand it better, maybe we can help people manage it better.
All right, so let's get that screen share back up there the correct way. Give me one moment. I had to close down my slides, so give me one moment.
No problem.
You know, they teach me all this great stuff in school, but they don't teach you all the great stuff about PowerPoint presentations. However, it's not going to stop the show. Get it
Well,
right
you're
back
doing
to
a
me.
great job, so it's okay.
All right. So now we're back to where we need to be. So I love that little video because it gives you a great example on what happens with pain and how does the medication know where to go. And so for methods of pain relief, we have exercise, physical and occupational therapy, massage, meditation. So this works by activating and reinforcing some of those areas in the brain that are involved in pain processing. It's thought that with decrease in stress, you have a decrease in pain. They also can use muscle rubs. So things like menthol and methyl salicylate are known as counter irritants. So essentially, they cause the skin to become cool and then warm. So this distracts from the pain that you feel deep within that muscle. Also, we have things called heat as well as cold therapy. So with the heat therapy, you can improve circulation as well as blood flow, resulting in more muscle flexibility. On the opposite spectrum, you have the cold therapy. This reduces the blood flow, which can significantly reduce inflammation and swelling that causes pain, especially in those joints and tendon areas. And it also causes a temporary reduction in nerve activity for nerve pain. Then you get to something like aspirin, acetaminophen, and ibuprofen, which are all over the counter. So the key is for just about everything that I've said thus far, we really haven't made it to the doctor yet, with the exception of physical and occupational therapy. Everything that we need to try for just pain, you have extra access for the most part. When those things fail, then we have things like prescription anti-inflammatories, muscle relaxants, and nerve pills. However, when all those other options fail, let's talk a little bit more about opioids, because now it's time for those to come into play.
Natasha, before you go further, can you share your screen? Your slides are not showing.
All right, give me one moment.
Yeah. I didn't want to interrupt you.
This is just we're just having some fun today, guys. Share. All right, so can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, So let's go back to here. So yeah, so now we're going to talk some more about opioids. And you guys are truly and sincerely, is just, just call it the luck of Natasha. Let's just call it that. So now let's talk some more about opioids. So opioids occur both naturally as well as synthetic. So for the natural opioids, they're actually found in our bodies. You have enkephalins as well as endorphins. And endorphins are those things that you get like that natural high from when you're exercising. And so a little lanyard, something that a lot of people don't know. Endorphins are a substance that helps with opioid-like effects. Is also found in your saliva. It's called opioids. You should go and Google it. It kind of make you feel like you know something extra that somebody else doesn't know. And so essentially what it does is it stops the breakdown of that one of those previously mentioned chemicals. So it eventually helps with the pain process. Also, you will find them naturally in substances in nature. So opium is extracted from a plant called Papaver somniferum or poppy plants. Morphine is the primary active component that you find in opium, and you also find codeine. Then we go on to the synthetic parts. Synthetics are both semi-synthetic as well as fully synthetic, and they're traditionally made in labs. Semi-synthetic examples are hydrocodone, oxycodone, and heroin. And then our full synthetic products are things like fentanyl, tramadol, and methadone. They can be both legal and illegal, such as heroin, and they're used to treat moderate as well as severe pain. So remember, it is not the first choice of therapy. The actions are all over the body. So it's in the brain, it's in the digestive tract, the spinal cord, limbs, and organs. They can be addictive, cause dependence, as well as tolerance. And here we see our common types of opioids. Oxycontin, tramadol, fentanyl, codeine, morphine, as well as heroin. And that little pretty plant at the top, I shouldn't call it pretty because it's bad, is your opium plant, your poppy plant. The effects of opioids. It causes drowsiness, nausea, constipation, urinary retention, euphoria, or that happy feeling that you see. Confusion, slow breathing, increase in pain sensitivity. So remember that you can't have one without the other. While you're going to feel better and with your pain and that quote unquote happy feeling, you're also going to get those unwanted things like drowsiness, nausea, and constipation. So let's go on to a little bit of numbers. So for 2019 national data, CDC is predicting a 6.6 increase in drug overdose deaths in 2019. 74% of those drug overdose deaths in the US involved opioids in 2019. Also, more than 72,000 individuals died of a drug overdose in the US. More than 73% of opioid-involved overdose deaths included a synthetic opioid such as fentanyl. And let's just pause right here for a second. Most of those fentanyl-related harms were related to something called illegally manufactured fentanyl due to its heroin-like effects. So essentially you take that and you mix it with heroin and or cocaine, and then it is used by a person with or without their knowledge because of the increased effects. But unfortunately, because the person does not know, you see an increase in death rates. So if you think about it, everything looks like this little white pill. And unfortunately, you may be a drug user and you're expecting it just to be fentanyl. So you take it at whatever way you take it when you usually get to whatever you're looking for just being fentanyl. Well, unfortunately, it has other substances in there as well. So you might have taken too much unknowingly. In Louisiana, fentanyl deaths are greater than both heroin deaths and prescription opioids. Deaths involving fentanyl have increased by 1,400%, 1,400% since 2014. And lastly, on average, 130 Americans die every day from an opioid overdose. Here we see ours, a graphic representation again. This is of opioid-involved deaths in Louisiana from 2012 to 2019. And here you, on this column, you see number of deaths, and at the bottom, the corresponding year. This chart includes traditional overdose deaths, but also includes other deaths not categorized as drug poisonings by coroners, but opioids probably contributed. So between 2018 and 2019, that was a 25% increase from 470 to 588. Overall, from 2012 to 2019, there was a 267 increase in deaths. So preliminary data that we have right now for 2020 actually shows that opioid as well as synthetic opioid deaths are doubling between the time frame of January to June. And you think about those things that we have dealt with in this state, such as COVID, and not just this state, but everywhere with COVID, and those isolation factors that come when you have COVID, as well as some of the financial stressors. All these things contribute to increased drug usage, unfortunately. Here's a little bit more data. There was 1,486 drug-involved deaths in 2019, 13,890 drug poison-related emergency department visits in 2018. And it shows you 2018 because unfortunately it takes a little bit longer to collect that data and we don't have it and it's still under analysis. 47 stimulant prescriptions per 100 people and 81 opioid analgesic prescriptions per 100 people. And so these two bottom squares are actually only two parameters that we see going down over the last few years. Everything else is going up. So that lets you know that the death rates are not just attributed to prescriptions, but there are other factors involved as well. This slide here just shows you that 588 again for the state of Louisiana in 2019. And the darker areas show you where there's more of a prevalence. And as it gets lighter, of course, the prevalence is not as great, or the reporting structure has not been as great for that area. And just so you know, this is you right up here, region 7. So opioid tolerance versus opioid dependence. Opioid tolerance occurs when a person using opioids begins to experience a reduced response to medication, requiring more of the opioid to experience the same effect. So essentially you've been taking X drug for 6 months to a year, the dose has been working, and all of a sudden it's no longer working. So you've developed a tolerance. Opioid dependence occurs when the body adjusts its normal functioning around the regular opioid use. However, unpleasant physical symptoms occur when the medication, is stopped. Opioid misuse. This refers to utilization in a manner other than prescribed. So take a moment now to think about this. This is called honest just reflection. How many people do we know that misuses opioids? And before you say, I don't know anyone, let me give you some examples. You get a prescription that says to take it once a day, but you decide to take it twice a day because that pain is a little bit greater than you anticipated. You're prescribed a prescription for a tooth pain from the dentist, but you don't finish all of it, and later on, something happens to your foot, and you decide to take it because, hey, you're thinking that's my medication. You're told to take something for 3 days, but you take it for 7 days. Or you may even loan it to a friend or a family member who's in need, and you're thinking you're just doing a good civic service, but unfortunately, that's the cause of misuse. It's estimated that 4 to 6% of people that misuse prescription opioids will transition to heroin. And about 8% of heroin users report first misusing prescription opioids. Opioid addiction, however, on the other hand, or opioid use disorder, occurs when attempts to cut down or control use are unsuccessful, or when your use results in problems in society such as work, school, and home. Opioid addiction often comes after the person has developed opioid tolerance and dependence, but it doesn't always have to happen that way, making it physically challenging to stop the opioid use and increasing the risk of withdrawal. So for dependence or physical dependence, it doesn't always mean that you have an addiction, but it can contribute to one. And people that misuse opioids are not always addicted. There's also no stereotypical type of person that you will find for addiction. It can happen to the old or the young. You can live in the rural areas or the suburban areas. Roughly 21 and 29% of people prescribed opioids for chronic pain will eventually misuse them, and between 8 to 12% develop opioid use disorder. So for opioids, they trigger the release of that substance I told you about earlier called endorphins, your brain's kind of like feel-good chemical. Those chemicals alter perception of pain and boost feelings of pleasure, creating a temporary but very powerful feeling of well-being. When the opioid dose wears off and is removed, you want that feeling back as soon as reasonably or as soon as possible, period. So this is the first milestone on the path to potential addiction. Some of those signs are uncontrollable cravings, drowsiness, changes in sleep patterns, isolation from family and friends, so you're no longer around them, frequent flu-like symptoms, the person's always sick, lack of hygiene, and weight loss. Other factors to consider: high risk environments. So you're in areas where there's a lot of drug use, unfortunately. It can be people on the corner selling drugs or even within your own household. Younger age makes you more susceptible for risky behaviors, unemployment, substance abuse history by the person or even someone in your family, heavy tobacco use, stress, as well as mental disorders. So this graphic shows you many different types of mental conditions: anxiety, depression, ADHD, bipolar depression. So many people with opioid use disorder are also diagnosed with mental health disorders and vice versa. The relationship between mental health disorders and chronic pain has been established as bidirectional, meaning when you see one go up, you see the other go up, and it doesn't matter which one it is. People with substance use disorder are roughly twice as likely to suffer from mood and anxiety problems, with the reverse also being true. Also, people with untreated mental disorders are more likely to experience severe pain. So this is why the CDC recommends that anyone that receives a prescription for chronic pain is also evaluated for mental health disorders. Other important facts about overdose. Essentially, it happens when there's excessive unopposed stimulation to that opioid pathway. It can be fatal as well as non-fatal. So some people will survive from it and some people will not. And rates are increasing in just about all parameters. Opioid-involved deaths as well as drug-involved deaths are on the increase. There was an 11% increase in drug-involved deaths as a whole between 2018 to 2019. But remember, that's actually a smaller increase when you look at and you isolate those opioid-involved deaths, because that rate was 25%. It will show both mental as well as physical effects. Those mental effects being things like aggression and paranoia and anxiety, and even permanent brain damage. Some of the physical effects we'll talk about more on the next slide, and it can be all of those things up to death, unfortunately. It requires immediate emergency care, and it's one of the leading causes of injury-related deaths in the United States. Injury-related basically means it's preventable. Johns Hopkins, which is one of the leading academic institutions in the United States, says that the opioid epidemic costs the United States $78.5 billion a year. And those funds are contributed to healthcare, lost productivity, addiction treatment, as well as the criminal justice system. Signs of opioid overdose: pinpoint pupils, slow, shallow breathing, limp body, choking, gurgling sounds, pale blue or cold skin, as well as loss of consciousness. So why is there a rise in misuse and overdose? Let's start with the misunderstanding between the patient and the provider. This happens more often than you think. You go into the doctor's office, whatever your reason may be, and you get that prescription, but unfortunately, you leave there not knowing how often you're supposed to take that medication, how long you're supposed to take it for. And one of the most important things that we often miss is, what is your treatment goal? Are you expected to receive 100% pain relief? Or is 50% pain relief considered a success in therapy? These are things that we need to know before we leave a doctor's office. A legal diversion for financial gain is another reason. People are trying to make money off it. Uncontrolled self-medication of pain or sleep disorders. There are a lot of people that will misuse medication because of sleep disorders because you're thinking, hey, remember opioids cause drowsiness. I can't sleep. Does it really hurt for me to take one or two of these to help me go to sleep at night? Combined use with other sedating medications. Prescribing outside of guidelines. Mental health disorders, as we talked about earlier. Other underlying illnesses such as heart problems, obesity, as well as respiratory illness. Unintentional exposure, and as well as the need for honest conversation and education. 53% of those that misuse opioids actually are getting them from a family member or friend. 37% get them from a healthcare provider, be it legal or illegal. And lastly, only 6%, believe it or not, get it from a dealer or a stranger. So it's happening close to home. So here we're getting to types of countermeasures for opioid overdose. You see the commonly used Narcan as well as Evizio. So there are 4 types of Naloxone currently available on the market. There's an injectable, the auto injector, which is Evizio right here, intranasal, as well as the nasal spray. Naloxone can be sprayed either in the nose or it will be injected into a thick area of the body or muscle, such as the upper arm or your thigh. The injectable essentially is you draw it up and you use it and just administer it like a shot. Versus the auto injector here, it is the most expensive version, but it can be used through your clothing, and it actually comes with voice instructions. The intranasal version, which is the older one, it requires assembly, and nasal spray, which is Narcan, which most of us know about, is the most common kind, created back in 1971. It's needle-free and ready to use. So here, of course, naloxone reverses opioid overdoses. This is important. Naloxone saves lives. It works as an opioid antagonist. It is not addictive. It is safe to use. Remember, when in doubt, take it out if you remember nothing else. You cannot hurt them by using it. It can only potentially help them if there's something going on. There is no RX required due to the standing order that Louisiana has. And always check the expiration date. Typically, it has a shelf life of 18 to 24 months. And recently, the FDA extended the shelf life to 24 to 36 months. So just make sure you check that container for the expiration date that it says. Remember to call 911. This is so important. The problem doesn't stop just because the Narcan has been administered. As I told you already, it was first approved back in 1971, and it works in minutes, maybe 2 to 3 minutes, but multiple doses are sometimes required depending on the drug that was used. It has a strong affinity, meaning that it takes priority when it is used versus the substance that already has been ingested. It can cause sudden withdrawal. So once you administer the naloxone, you can see things like agitation, hypertension, fever and sweating, as well as violent behavior. It typically works for 30 to 90 minutes. There's a range there because it depends on the type of opioid that you have used. If it's a very long-acting drug and how much of it that you took. And we also need to remember that it does not prevent death caused by other drugs. So it will not work for cocaine. It will not work for benzodiazepines, or as people call on the street, benzos, or alcohol. And this diagram right here essentially shows you what I was talking about that strong affinity. So you see the opioid representation here and the opioid receptor or active site and where it's bound. But when naloxone comes into play or into the picture, it takes that opioid and kicks it off of that active site because it has stronger affinity, and it replaces it in those active sites, and that's how you get the reversal of the overdose. Here we see our representation of Narcan and how it's used. Our pretty much quick start guide, steps 1, 2, and 3. Remember to ask the patient, are you okay? Shout their name, shake them, nudge them, try to get a response. Check for those signs of overdose that I told you about earlier, those pinpoint pupils, the blue skin, the choking, gurgling sounds. If no response, it's time to use the nasal spray. Take it out of the box and get it in the proper position with your fingers like this. Take the head, gently raise it up, and administer the spray with the plunger. But remember, it is time to call 911 if you haven't already done so, because the life-saving measures are not complete. Move the person to that recovery position on their side and watch for those signs of withdrawal, because sometimes they can be a lot, and see and make sure there was a response. If in 2 to 3 minutes you don't have a response, you may need to administer another dose. So opioid prescription storage and disposal. This is important because a lot of the problems that we see comes from improper storage. You want to store the medication in cool, dry places. Use a secured storage box and hopefully put it on an upper shelf. And you want to discard of your unused medication. This is due to potential for accidental poisoning, misuse, as well as overdose. Proper disposal saves lives and it protects the environment. According to the FDA, as many as 90% of patients do not finish the full opioid prescription. The best time to plan for how you're going to handle the disposal and storage of your medication is actually before you get them and bring them home. Approximately 80% of opioid emergencies from overdoses are deemed accidental. And lastly, according to Johns Hopkins, 60% of people report keeping their leftover opioids for future use. So here are your methods that you can use for disposal. Some of the things you already may have at home. You have things like kitty litter. Now, don't put it in a kitty litter and leave the cat in the box. Take it and put it in the trash, okay? Don't hurt the little kitty. You have things like coffee grinds, commercial available products that you can get from your local drugstore. Dispose RX, I believe is one name of it. It is not the only one. I don't have any financial interest in that product. It's just one of the things that you can use. There's an approved flush list for those things that can be flushed. And lastly, there's a national take back day that's sponsored by the DEA. It's usually every spring and fall. And the next one actually is coming up soon on October 24th. Here's a graphic representation of what you would do when it's time to dispose of those medications. Here you see where that medication is mixed in that ground substance that's unpalatable. It's not a desirable substance. You then place it in a bag and seal it and toss it in the trash. And please remember that once you take the medication out of the bottle, to remove your HEPA before you dispose of the bottle. This right here is a list of medications that are approved for flushing. It is a list of various medications with their active ingredients as well as their known brand names. And if you would like a copy of this, you can visit Drugs at FDA. And lastly, help is just a click or a call away. There are various resources that we have out there, ldh.le.gov. You have SAMHSA, which is number right here, 211, as well as services in your Region 7 area, a Shreveport area. And I'll leave the slide here for a few moments, just in case you want to jot something down for later use. And after this, we're going to go to the next slide. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds, and we can always go back to it if needed. So now it's time for our knowledge gain check. So if you would notice that at the start of the presentation, it's just said Trivial Pursuit. But now that we're done and I've given you all this different information, we are now all considered masters. So if you would like, we're going to go back through this questions from the start of the presentation. You can choose to unmute yourself for conversation or just put your answers in the chat box. It's up to you, but I'm here for all the conversation you want until Samantha says we can't talk anymore. So which drug is not an opioid? The correct answer is A. I apologize. I'm messing up. It's B, Adderall. Heroin is the opioid, Norco, as well as fentanyl. Adderall is actually a stimulant, which is known as an amphetamine.
Melissa got that one right.
All right, Melissa. How many opioid-involved deaths did Louisiana have in 2019? Was it 425, 913, 588, or 762? The correct answer is C, 588.
And Cassandra got that one right.
All right, for Cassandra. Opioids have actions in what portion of the body? The brain area, digestive tract, spinal cord, or all of the above? The correct answer is all of the above.
So everyone got that one right, but Melissa was the first one to type in the answer.
Oh, Melissa's been paying attention. That's my type of girl right there. And so you need to remember that when you take, how do you know where the medication goes? It goes everywhere. It doesn't just go to that spot that's hurting in your body. We have receptors all over our body. So that's why when you get that feeling of pain reduction, you also may have problems with constipation, unfortunately, because you have receptors in your digestive tract. What is not a sign of addiction? Drowsiness, lack of hygiene, frequent flu-like symptoms, or weight gain. So the correct answer is D, weight gain. All of these are signs, with the exception of D, it would be weight loss.
And everyone got that one right too, but Cassandra was the first on the answer.
Okay. Which characteristic is not a sign of opioid overdose? Stiff body, pinpoint pupils, choking sounds, slow or shallow breathing.
Okay, it looks like all answers are in.
All right, so the correct answer is A, stiff body. All of those are signs, but it would be a limp body, not a stiff body.
And everyone got that one correct too, but Yolanda this time was the first one to buzz in.
All right. Select an approved method of disposal for unused medication. Mix it with dog food, give unused portion to a friend, kitty litter. Medication doesn't go bad. You keep it for other pain. And all of y'all are probably laughing, but I'm sure quite a few of y'all on this call think medication doesn't go bad. The correct answer is C, kitty litter.
Everyone's been paying attention. They all got it right. Yolanda was first.
All right, so at this time, that completes the presentation. I apologize for all of my technical mishaps, but I hope I gave you some great information and you learned something tonight. So if you would like, we can open up the floor for anyone that may have questions at this time.
Okay, and everyone should be able to unmute themselves if they would like to say anything or add to the discussion. It looks like you're getting lots of great jobs in the chat box.
Good job, Natasha. Gosh, I mean, I learned quite a bit actually. So thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
We'll give them to 7 o'clock if you wanted, Samantha, to see if they have any questions. Were there any questions in the chat box?
There were no questions in the chat box. Everyone just, they liked the video. They thought the video was cute. We did get some compliments on the video about the aspirin and the ibuprofen.
Yes.
And the pain receptors. But so far, all the comments are just been, you've done a great job. And we really do appreciate you for being a part of our Tough Topics discussion.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love that video. I love how he says cozily.
And you got some hand claps, so that's good too.
All right.
Melissa says, thanks so much. She loved TED Eds too. And this was a great Zoom meeting. So good job.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So you let me know when it's over. If we're done, you let me know when you're ready to stop looking at my pretty smile.
We love seeing your pretty smile. And I just want to thank you again. And for all those who had registered but weren't able to actually log on to the live event, we have been recording this presentation and it will be uploaded to the Shreve Memorial Library YouTube page so that they'll be able to view it at a later date and time. So thank you again for being a part of our Tough Topics. And You can go ahead and wrap it up, and I just invite everyone to join us next Thursday for our next Tough Topics discussion. This has been a lot of fun and I've learned so much. So thank you again, and thank you to Yolanda for helping us to coordinate this great speaker series.
You
All
are
right.
welcome. My
I hope
pleasure.
everyone has a wonderful fall night.
Yes, thank you. All right.
Good
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
night.
Right.